Over the past few months, a surprising debate has been gaining momentum. Which is the best fighter for Canada? The American-led F-35 or the Swedish-built Gripen E? Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you might already know that I am a big Gripen fan. In fact, I've often called it one of the best bang-for-the-buck fighters on the market, especially for nations that value operating in dispersed and austere environments. If you need advanced sensor fusion, a relatively small maintainer footprint, and want to operate off of really any long straight stretch of highway you come across, the Gripen, particularly the most modern Gripen E, is a pretty good choice. That is, unless you've got F-35 money. At around $85 million per airframe, the Gripen E is cheaper than the F-35A, which with an engine rings in at around $100 million. But that $15 million difference is money well spent. The truth of the matter is, the Gripen is anything but a bad fighter, but no matter how advanced the avionics or how flashy the marketing materials, it is still just a heavily upgraded fourth-generation jet produced by a single nation with a limited budget and exacting needs. The F-35, on the other hand, is objectively one of, if not the most advanced tactical aircraft ever to fly, with continuous upgrades funded through a partnership of 20 nations and more than 1 million flight hours racked up across 1,255 fighters already delivered. As for the Gripen E, well, so far, fewer than a dozen have been delivered, and capable as they could be, they would all be flying at a distinct disadvantage against any F-35 they happened across. Of course, I'm not new to the internet, so I know there are already people commenting about how the F-35 is too expensive, too unreliable, too crash-prone, or too riddled with American kill switches to be a good investment for any nation, Canada included. So let's talk about the Gripen vs. F-35 debate, and the rampant misinformation about both aircraft being spread by all sides. And finally, why the F-35 isn't just the better option for Canada. In my mind, it's really the only one. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. In 2017, Canada kicked off the Future Fighter Capability Project with the express goal of replacing the nation's aging fleet of CF-18 Hornets, which is a Canadian version of the American F-18 Hornet that's already been retired from U.S. Navy service but is still flying for the Marine Corps. By 2021, both the Eurofighter Typhoon and Dassault Rafale had bowed out of the competition, claiming that Canada's requirements unfairly benefited American manufacturers. Then, Canada booted Boeing's F-18 Super Hornet from consideration with not much in the way of formal explanation, leaving it down to Lockheed Martin's 5th generation F-35A and Saab's 4.5th generation Gripen E. So let's run down a quick tale of the tape. The Runway Queen F-35A is 51.4 feet long, about 15.7 meters, with a 35-foot or 11-meter wingspan. It's powered by a single Pratt & Whitney F-135 turbofan engine capable of pumping out a jaw-dropping 43,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner, which can propel the jet to Mach 1.6 and offers a 1.07 to 1 thrust-to-weight ratio with a half a tank of gas and a full combat load. Now, the F-35 can currently carry 4 weapons internally, but that is expanding to 6 in the Block 4 upgrade, with 6 more external hardpoints for when stealth isn't a concern. It boasts the most capable fighter radar in the world, an infrared distributed aperture system with electro-optical targeting capabilities, and maybe most notable of all in this competition, it's said to have a frontal radar cross-section of roughly 0.005 square meters, or about the size of a golf ball, with enemy targeting even further hampered by advanced electronic warfare capabilities, radio frequency countermeasures, and towed decoys. Now, the Gripen E is 49 feet 10 inches, or about 15.2 meters long, with a 28-foot 3-inch, or 8.6 meter wingspan. It's also powered by a single engine, a GE F414 turbofan that's capable of producing just 22,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner. But with a maximum takeoff weight that's just over half that of the F-35, this lighter jet delivers a higher top speed of Mach 2 with a very respectable 1.04 to 1 thrust-to-weight ratio. Now, the Gripen E offers a total of 10 hardpoints, all external, with an advanced ESO-5 Raven radar array, infrared search and track capabilities, and a pretty robust electronic warfare and countermeasure suite. Importantly, though, the Gripen is not a stealth fighter, giving the F-35 an immediate edge in survivability. Now, in 2021, Canada's Department of National Defence, or the DND, held a fly-off of sorts that pitted these two aircraft against one another and assessed them based on 5 categories, each weighted differently from most to least: mission performance, upgradability, sustainment, technical criteria, and capability delivery. And while this information wasn't disclosed to the public at the time, it has since been revealed that the F-35 absolutely dominated the Gripen in each and every category. In mission performance, the F-35 scored a whopping 97% against the Gripen's 22%. In upgradability, the F-35 scored a 100% versus the Gripen's 28%. In sustainment, where you might expect the F-35 to fall short of the Gripen, it still won, with an 85% versus Saab's 81%. In technical criteria, the F-35 scored 86% versus the Gripen's 55%. And finally, in capability delivery, the F-35 managed its lowest score of the competition at 67%, but that was still more than enough to beat the Gripen at 54%. With the weighted scores fully tallied, the jets were given a final grade out of a total of 60 possible points. Lockheed Martin's stealth fighter came in at just below perfect, with 57.113 points, or a bit better than a 95% grade, while Saab's Gripen E topped out at just 19.762 points. That's just under 33%. If these jets were high school students, one would be the valedictorian and the other would be a dropout. And this outcome mirrored disclosed accounts of a similar Finnish competition called the HX Fighter program, held prior to Finland opting to buy the F-35A as well. Now, that competition allowed different combinations of aircraft to operate in concert with one another, but still ultimately saw the F-35 win or tie for first place in every category, with the F-18 Super Hornet paired with its EA-18G Growler sibling taking second place, and the Gripen E, supported by not one, but 2 Global Eye AWACS, or Airborne Warning and Control aircraft, placing third. And this competition also engaged with the very popular comparison of operating costs between these aircraft, with the Gripen E claimed to ring in at just $8,000 to $10,000 per flight hour versus the F-35 at around $30,000 per hour. Now, in direct competition, the Finnish found that none of the jets, including the Eurofighter and the Rafale, significantly outperformed the others in terms of operating costs. It turns out, Saab's $8,000 to $10,000 per hour claim originated from a self-funded 2012 study, nor does it include anything other than fuel and consumables, while the F-35's reported operating costs include practically everything, including pay for the maintainers and techs, the electric bill, and whatever else you can come up with. According to Aviation Week, the Gripen E's hourly operating costs are actually more like $22,175 per hour, including $9,975 for operations, or those consumables we mentioned, and Saab's omitted $12,200 per hour for the maintenance. Likewise, Saab marketing materials have really pushed the idea that the Gripen is a better choice for Arctic conditions, but that's also pretty questionable. Norway has reported that their F-35As have performed well in Arctic conditions since they arrived in 2015, though they did install custom-designed drag chutes to be better able to operate from shorter, icy runways. The United States has also operated F-35s out of Alaska since 2020. Now, again, the Gripen may be a plenty capable fourth-generation aircraft, but at the end of the day, fifth-generation fighters like the F-35 are just in a league of their own. That's why they were given a new generational designation in the first place. And this is why, long before these figures were released to the public, most folks with any appreciable expertise in tactical aviation saw this competition as more of a formality than anything else. The F-35 is an objectively better fighter than the Gripen, or any other fourth-gen fighter on the market for that matter, and that is exactly why it has so dominated in foreign sales that today, the F-35 that didn't enter service until 2015 is already among the most widely operated fighters on the planet, beating out many of the same fourth-generation aircraft that it had to compete with to secure those foreign contracts. In 2022, Canada announced their selection of the F-35, and in 2023, a deal was finalized that included the purchase of the nation's first F-35As, with long-term plans to acquire a total of 88 stealth fighters. But that was all before relations between the US and Canada began to sour, with the Trump administration taking a very adversarial approach to managing its relationship with America's neighbor to the north. In 2025, newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that while Canada was already committed to purchasing those first 16 F-35As, his government would be reviewing the planned purchase of the next 72, reopening the Gripen vs. F-35 floodgates and prompting a renewed push for buying Swedish fighters over American ones. Now, this tension between governments has all but certainly emboldened the F-35's Canadian critics, and their concerns are only exacerbated by the long-standing myth that the American president has some sort of kill switch on his desk that can render export F-35s inoperable. Now, we've discussed this kill switch myth on this channel before, so I'll try to dispel it as briefly as I can. First and foremost, there is not a single credible source or piece of evidence anywhere, in print or recorded, that has ever suggested that there's any kind of kill switch in the F-35. I've spoken to folks at Lockheed Martin, at the US Air Force, and in the US Navy about it, and all of them have been clear that they have never heard so much as a whisper about an F-35 kill switch. In fact, most of them instead pointed out what an incredible security risk it would be to have remote kill switches in these aircraft, because all an adversary would need to do is access that kill switch to ruin a Lockheed customer's day, or maybe a year. And maybe most important of all, the United States doesn't need a kill switch like that because logistics serve as a physical one. Without external logistics support, any F-35, or just about any fighter in general, is only days away from becoming a paperweight. I think this kill switch myth really just harkens back to the long-standing American myth of an omnipotent and omnipresent military force with secret science fiction levels of technology. After all, back in September of 2023, a Marine Corps pilot ejected from his F-35B over South Carolina, but the jet kept flying for 11 more minutes, and that was enough to completely lose the aircraft for more than 27 hours, as authorities scoured the area for its remains. And it's just pretty silly to me to believe that the US could single out Canadian F-35s operating anywhere in the world with a kill switch, when it can't even use electronic signals to single out one missing F-35 in its own backyard. Now, political tensions between the American and Canadian governments are very real, but sometimes it can be tough to see just how deep those tensions really cut. Despite political statements in the press, American and Canadian defense efforts have a long and fruitful history of cooperation, and in the present are increasingly intertwined. NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, as a great example, is not an American command element, but rather a joint American and Canadian one. And to be frank, Canada would benefit from the F-35's long-range detection and sensor fusion capabilities when it comes to policing their vast northern territories, something that NORAD supports and has invested in radar systems that integrate very well with the F-35. In a lot of ways, Canadian security is American security, and vice versa. So there's at least some reason to believe that the relationship between these two countries is too strong, or maybe too important, to wither away under the policies of any one administration. Now, opinion pieces in Canadian media, like this one by business columnist David Olive for the Toronto Star, really highlight the most glaring concerns Canadians have about the F-35, which, ironically enough, aren't really related to the aircraft at all. Instead, the primary points Olive makes are about the potential benefits that a Gripen buy could have for the Canadian industrial base, and those looming concerns about President Trump's aggressive rhetoric toward the nation. As he points out, Canada is already committed to buying at least 16 F-35s, and the Canadian military has been very open about not wanting to operate a mixed fleet of fighters, meaning F-35s and Gripens, because it would mean having to maintain two different training pipelines, two different logistics chains, separate maintenance facilities, and more, driving up costs across the board. Olive counters that by arguing, and I quote, "But spending billions of dollars on fighter jets from a country waging economic war on Canada and threatening its sovereignty would seem to make even less sense." Conversely, Saab has offered to build a Gripen manufacturing facility in Canada to fill its fighter orders, but that would honestly be necessary anyway because Sweden absolutely does not have the industrial capacity to fill its existing Gripen orders, let alone a new one coming from Canada. Now, Saab has also pitched building manufacturing facilities for GlobalEye AWACS in Canada too, and combined, that could bring an estimated 13,000 jobs to the Canadian market. And maybe most importantly, Saab has offered to sell the Gripen intellectual property rights to Canada, making it a Canadian-built fighter that they could potentially export themselves, though all but certainly in partnership with Saab. And while this does all sound pretty good, this Gripen offer is mired in a lot of maybes and potentialities, with the only concrete certainty being that Canada would end up operating less capable fighters. The F-35 program, however, has already been benefiting Canadian industry for years now, with over $3.3 billion in contracts already awarded to more than 30 different Canadian firms for the development and production of different F-35 components. And as a part of the F-35 purchase agreement, both Lockheed Martin and engine supplier Pratt & Whitney have signed economic benefits arrangements, or EBAs, with the Canadian government that ensures future contracts come Canada's way. Olive also highlights concerns about the F-35 being cut off logistically by American suppliers. But this line of thought completely ignores how the same could be said for the Gripen. The Gripen E is, after all, powered by an American-sourced GE F-414 turbofan engine that is still subject to American export controls. And while there has been rumors of Saab swapping the GE power plant out for a Rolls-Royce engine, that would take a significant and expensive and time-consuming redesign that would also significantly delay Canada's fighter deliveries. And again, it is important to note that Canada has been looking to replace its worn-out Hornets since before 2010. And even if Saab does trade engines, roughly a reported 1/3 of all Gripen components come from US suppliers, including vital elements of its life support system that come from Honeywell. In fact, it's been reported that the Gripen is more reliant on American-sourced hardware than the Eurofighter Typhoon or the Dassault Rafale, making it a pretty crappy choice if the driving force in your decision-making process is divorcing your fighter lines from American support. And then, of course, there's the rising cost of the F-35 program. When Canada agreed to buy 88 F-35s initially, it was for a total projected cost of 19 billion Canadian dollars. But today, that cost has risen to 27.7 billion. Now, this price tag, of course, doesn't just cover the jets themselves, but also infrastructure, associated equipment, sustainment, setup, services and training, information services, and a bunch of other stuff. And while there is no debating that this is a huge rise in costs, the way this cost increase has been presented in the media has been, unsurprisingly, a bit skewed. Part of the rise in costs, Canada's Auditor General Karen Hogan explained, was due to the Canadian government using outdated figures for its own future projections back in 2022. But the biggest culprits, she determined, were actually external factors unrelated to the aircraft itself. I'll quote her now. We found that an important part of the increase in the department's updated cost estimates of $27.7 billion was caused by global factors. Specifically, rising inflation, fluctuations in foreign exchange rates, and heightened global demand for munitions. Now, this means cost increases over time, especially in the current state of the global economy, are effectively impossible to avoid no matter the fighter you buy. And that means costs would likely increase for the Gripen over time as well. The Gripen, it is worth noting, has not been immune to cost increases or delays itself. Brazil has seen deliveries on its Gripen Es now stretched to 8 years behind schedule, with its overall program costs increasing by 13% to date, effectively adding the cost of 6 additional Gripen Es to the program's overall price tag. Maybe the most pointed and fair criticism of the F-35, however, comes down to the fighter's availability and mission-capable rates. Now, it is not uncommon to hear people talk about F-35s as always being down for maintenance, and it is objectively true that F-35 availability rates continue to come in at below the Air Force's goals. But it is also really important to understand that we hear all about F-35 availability rates, and we see these figures reported in the news all the time without ever presenting any greater context or basis for comparison. For instance, you might be surprised to learn that in 2024, American F-35As offered higher availability rates than literally any other fighter in the Air Force, beating out the F-15E, the F-16C and D, the F-22, and the F-15C and D. The F-35A also led the Air Force in flying hours per aircraft in 2024. And while the idea that F-35s are too expensive to operate continues to be pervasive online, the Congressional Budget Office points out that in 2024, the F-35A cost pretty much exactly the same to fly as America's F-15E Strike Eagles. We could keep delving through the weeds of the Gripen versus F-35 debate, highlighting the specific instances where the Gripen may edge out the F-35 or vice versa, but the objective reality of the situation is that the F-35 is not just the better fighter, it also has much greater potential in the future. The F-35 program's upgrades do admittedly tend to run behind schedule and over budget. There is no denying that. But they also represent the very cutting edge of aviation technology in a way that only a program being funded by 20 countries could offer. The F-35's incredibly powerful AN/APG-81 active electronically scanned array radar, as one great example, is already considered to be the best in the world. But there is already a replacement in the works, in the form of Northrop Grumman's AN/APG-85 that's expected to be significantly more powerful. But maybe most importantly, when it comes to upgrades, the F-35 could actually carry them. The Gripen E is powered, again, by a single F414 turbofan engine, which means it offers literally exactly half the power of an F-18 Super Hornet. So while the Gripen E can produce 22,000 pounds of thrust under full afterburner, the F-35 can produce 28,000 pounds of thrust without using its afterburner at all. When the F-35 actually does engage its afterburner, that thrust leaps up to an astonishing 43,000 pounds. And that means the F-35 can carry a lot more hardware, allowing for more future options. Now, the Gripen E can lug a maximum payload of roughly 15,900 pounds in total, while the F-35 can carry 15,000 pounds on external pylons and another 5,700 pounds internally. The Gripen's lighter weight, it is important to note, however, does give it a higher top speed, Mach 2, versus the F-35's Mach 1.6, and a greater combat radius of 930 miles for the Gripen versus 770 for the F-35. And it is also important to note that the F-35's Pratt & Whitney F-135 turbofan engines are reaching the limits of their cooling capacity, which limits their electrical power production going forward. So serious upgrades like directed energy weapons down the line will have to coincide with engine improvements to the cooling system that are actually already underway. Now, neither the Gripen E nor the F-35 are perfect jets. Every fighter design is an exercise in compromise, but if the question is, which is the better jet, the answer is abundantly clear. It's the F-35 by a mile. But then, few seem to actually be arguing with that reality. Instead, the push toward the Gripen really seems to be more motivated by politics than by battlefield capability. And as for whether or not politics will be enough to overcome the F-35's massive capability advantage, I guess only time will tell. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.